I think we've got a good group of people on the call, and I do want to say this first and foremost. I appreciate everybody carving out some time to just hop on and listen into this conversation. We know you guys are busy and you got other things to do. This is going to be a very open, kind of conversational, interactive, collaborative session. So our ask and plead is to, stop us, pause us, ask questions, get involved. But this conversation is going to be around orchestration and automation. If you see here on the slide, the S is kind of off on its own. Gartner coined it as SOAR, Security, Orchestration, Automation, and Response. We don't think this is just a security conversation. We think that this type of technology can enable much more than just security teams. There are other people within IT that can benefit from some of these flows or playbooks or whatever the terminology you'll hear later on. So, welcome to this conversation. As far as presenters, I'm just kicking us off. You're going to have Adam Leinhart with Land O'Lakes. He's a security analyst engineer and is gracing us with his time and effort. Steve Goers is my engineer. I work for him. We both were at CrowdStrike, albeit a lot of you guys on the call know that we were at McAfee for over 20 years. We've been at CrowdStrike for over a year. And then Michelle is the CEO founder of Nevolex Labs. So what I would like to do is I want to kind of set the stage. I want to go back a couple years and talk about how we got started. Steve and I personally had the opportunity to work with Land O'Lakes and continue to work with Land O'Lakes for probably the past 8 to 9 years. And back in our former days, we had a lot of products that we positioned to Land O'Lakes. And Land O'Lakes challenged us to, hey, we want to use your products, but we want to get them to, we want to integrate them, and we want them to integrate with other, vendors, security vendors, and we want to be able to do some orchestration and automation. What we came to find out is some of the stuff at our previous vendor, when they talked about security connected, it was really more like security kind of connected. And it really required security engineers and people within IT to be able to Python script. And that's where Michelle came into play. And probably about 2 years ago is when we kind of started to create what we didn't know at the time was an orchestration, automation, and response platform. And Michelle and his team stepped up, and we're going to jump into what Land O'Lakes is doing today, where they started and where they are today. It's a journey. It's not a destination. There is constant improvement. And one of the things that I'll mention to everybody on this call is one of the pushbacks I get when we talk about helping with doing orchestration and automation is, well, we don't have enough time. That is exactly what this tool and technology is designed to be. There are other vendors out there like Demisto and Phantom. Nevolex Labs is local to the Twin Cities, and fortunately, we've learned a lot over the past couple of years, and we believe in the cause. So if anybody has questions around trying to get into this space and this technology or questions, we welcome those. A little background on Land O'Lakes, if you don't know, they're roughly about a $14 billion company. Most of you probably know Land O'Lakes is a milk butter company, yogurt creamery. What you don't probably know is they own Purina, not for cats and dogs, but for farm animals, zoos, etc. And they also have Winfield, which is their ag tech crop intelligence business. So those are the 3 lines of business. They've got about 10,000 employees. They operate in roughly all 50 U.S. states, and then they're growing their global footprint. But I will say that they have a limited team, and that is a constant theme in security. Either the talent doesn't exist, they don't have the team, nor the time, the budget, and they don't know how to Python script. So we'll get into the weeds a little bit, but I'm going to pass it off to Michelle real quick, and we'll jump on in. So go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, thanks, Lucas. Thanks for that introduction. That was very informative. What I want to talk about real quickly is some of the conversations we've had with people about what's the barrier to entry and how we can work by that. So some of the headwinds we've heard about, lacking time, lacking people. Another one that we've heard sometimes is there's existing scripts. So we don't want to lose the advantage that we have with some of those automation tools already. And throughout this presentation, we'll go through, and Adam in particular will highlight some of why they were able to get by those things and how they were able to get by those things. So how do we have, or why do we have some things that we can address to improve the reasoning for uptake on the product like this? So you have a whole set of security tools and they don't communicate very well with each other. So we provide the framework and a repeatable framework that lets those integrate together. And then another big one, honestly, is resource optimization. So the people that you do have can focus on the more important things, and a lot of the mundane activities can be optimized out so they don't have to worry about that. One thing that we didn't put on here is you can centralize your code too. So if you have a set of scripts or a set of playbooks that you're going to run, they can all exist in one location and help this out. Any questions on this before we move on? All right, so I want to get into some of the terminology before Adam starts talking about what Land O'Lakes has had with their experience and their journey. One of the first terms, API, I think everybody's probably heard of that, Application Programmers Interface. Within the Security Flow product itself, we refer to our integrations as a plugin, and a plugin essentially consists of the integration that we have with a third-party vendor, and it consists also of a set of flow programming nodes where we'll show some pictures of flow so you can see what a node looks like. And then a set of configuration parameters that need to be defined to create what we call a plugin instance. And a plugin instance is how we actually communicate with that vendor or service. Next slide, please. Additionally, within our environment, we have what's known as a flow. And a flow consists of a set of nodes. And this picture in the center represents a set of node performing a sequence of operations. And each node is a functional block. And then as a message traverses this flow, that is basically a JavaScript object that represents the information that's being passed between those nodes. On the UI side, outside of this flow definition, we have a timeline, and a timeline represents an incident. An incident is essentially a message that has traversed a flow. And that incident timeline lets you see all of the operations that were performed. Additionally, we have this concept of a data renderer. And in that case, what we're doing is transforming the raw JSON and providing a way to view it that's more meaningful to an end user. So instead of looking at raw JSON, you're seeing meaningful data. Additionally, we have this concept of an injection where instead of having an event triggered by, let's say, a SIM or maybe an email account that's being monitored, we can manually trigger an injection and perform an operation. That comes in handy when you want to, say, inject, say, a comma-separated value file or CSV file and trigger actions based on an entire list of data. And so at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Adam so he can start talking about their experience with Security Flow and their journey.
Thanks, Michelle. So everyone, I'd like to set the tone as well with Lucas. If you guys have any questions, don't be afraid to put something in the chat or interrupt. I'm happy to answer anything. And also, if it's too complicated, I have a secret phone the friend in the audience I might call on at some point. But to kind of kick us off, my name's Adam. So I've been with Land O'Lakes 2 years. And since I've started, I've really been working with Michelle and Security Flow very closely. I spend a lot of my time developing flows, kind of thinking up APIs to continue to grow our business and get deeper into the SOAR environment. Lucas, next slide, please. So before I kick off anything about where we are today, I kind of want to go through this model. And this model will set kind of a precedence for what we're doing and why we jumped into SOAR for when we did. And initially, it starts with where we were. And thinking back 2 years, we had our usual IDS, IPS, firewall, all the standard every security group has. We also started having a SIM, and we were sending logs to a common location for event viewing, event monitoring, and really, getting into what's going on in our environment. But the issue was, is as we grew in these spaces, we didn't have necessarily the eyes on glass to deal with every event or see every alert every day. And it kind of just came down to a people issue. So to get to that next level of maturity, a SOAR was kind of where we pointed our eyes to. Now, as you can see, this is all kind of just a goal to get to that predictive analytics someday. But currently, we're still building out use cases. We started with 1 or 2 good ones, and we just kind of ran from there. And today we have a good library, and I'll kind of talk about that later. And if you are interested in this model, you can kind of just Google SOC capability maturity model, and it's usually the first one that pops up. So if you're interested, go take a look at that. But any questions here before I go on to the next slide? No. Okay, Lucas, go ahead. So to kind of kick us off, solution-wise, what were we really looking to solve? It was the same as probably everyone with the high workloads, those annoying mundane tasks Michelle mentioned, alert fatigue, just the general every IT person's probably dealt with at some point in their life. So for us, when we initially jumped into SOAR with Security Flow, it was how can we take these tasks and just start focusing on the small bits? Let's just take small steps toward automation. And for us, it was phishing. And I'll talk about this more later. But kind of think for yourself, what small tasks could we kind of just tackle and just get small time savings on? And that's really the mentality that we took on as a group, just to try to find these small tasks. Where can I sit down and say 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there? Because at the end of the day, everything you develop for a SOAR platform is kind of just reinvested into itself, as well as it's a continuous time savings. You don't have to reinvest unless you're doing small tweaks, but those are few and far between after the initial stages. So from there, our mentality was kind of let's have an engineer-driven focus where a lot of our engineers would go in and, give us their use cases, give us their alerts. And at the time, we actually didn't have a SOC. We started with 4 engineers who were building out alerts and kind of planning through what they want. And when I joined, my focus was, how can we turn this manual process into something automatic? And it was a continuous development that we had. And the nice thing about using Security Flow was that we could even include some of our rotational employees. So at Land O'Lakes, we're lucky enough to have a program where someone can come in for 6 months and work with us, and they know the business in a different light. So just because they don't have 20 years of a coding experience and a degree doesn't mean they can't get into Security Flow and help us build something that lasts a lot longer than they're around. And it's the same with interns. We have interns come in and they actively get to make their own flow, and we use that flow way after they've left. And like me, I was an intern and I came back, and we continue to see benefits of things that I helped work on initially. So allowing for this easy inclusion, it means you don't need the experts to kind of nail everything down. And if you don't understand something, the nice thing is for us is Michelle was able to hold our hand through the really complicated parts. And it kind of just shows in everything we've done that we have an expert behind us if we really need them to help. And this all just leads into that continual growth and the continual product advancement. We just wanted to make sure we took one step forward and just kept reinvesting our time on every completion we had. Make sense? Any questions from the audience or comments from the peanut gallery?
Adam,
No, we'll move on.
were there some things that you guys looked into that you ultimately decide, say, against trying to automate? Were there any some things there that maybe seemed kind of obvious, but when you got into it, they were there, and vice versa? Were there some things where it's like, man, we didn't think about it, but when we got into it, man, it's like we could actually do this really easily?
Yes. There was a infamous use case back in the day where Danos, my manager, had where he wanted to update every system whenever a new subnet was created. And it was such a terrible idea because no one could figure out how to do it because there were so many moving parts. And we actually did end up completing the flow relatively easy after we picked up security flow, just because it was able to handle all those moving pieces. Now, on the point of, was there a use case we did have where we didn't create it? Not yet, and I'm just saying because we have a backlog. I get pinged all the time from conversations I have with my coworkers about, hey, new use case, and maybe we can't do it today for one reason or another, but we still have it sitting there because we never know when the time's gonna click and we can look at it and go, oh, this use case is definitely possible now, where it wasn't maybe a couple weeks ago due to a development problem. But yeah,
Cool.
good
That's
question.
good. That's helpful.
And for future reference, that wasn't a terrible idea. That was actually a great idea, just complex.
It was painful.
I
But it was
love
great.
it. I love it. All right.
So going into the next part of what I want to talk about, flow creation. How do we get from use case to a complete automatic flow? So what we'd end up doing is we always try to identify those mundane tasks, and for this, I'm going to specifically just reference phishing. And for yourself, again, try to think of that one task where you wake up and it's the last thing you want to do, but you have to do it because it's a part of your job. These mundane tasks, they're easy to kind of break down into just automation steps. Instead of point A to Z, let's go A to B and then B to C. Because the small time savings we can get, we can just reinvest. So for us, phishing, we have users reporting emails all the time. They can be good emails that they just didn't know, spam, or actually malicious phishing emails that come into our environment. And we get roughly 60 plus a day, where maybe there's anywhere from 10 to 15 purges completed, which means we're going out and actively purging from other users' inboxes. So this use case was definitely something where you look at it in a wide. Oh, sorry, Lucas, you lost my train of thought. You look at it in a wide range, and there's a lot going on. But if you break it up, we can start simple. Let's just reply back to the user. You write an email every day. Well, when you're writing 60 emails to 60 different people, and you could get replies, it becomes a full-time job just dealing with those emails. So we created an inbox folder, and we drug the different types of emails, malicious, spam, or good, into those folders and let Nevilex Labs and Security Flow deal with the responses. So we would make a blanket statement there. They can just reply and say, oh, this is malicious, this is good, this is spam. Great. So we just saved ourselves all that time writing emails, which doesn't seem like a lot, but if you spend 5 minutes a day on each email, and there's 60 emails a day, that's a good portion of your time just dealing with writing emails. So we have our emails done. Now let's look at the malicious side. If we want to purge emails, I have to log into Exchange, and I have to find the emails, and then I have to do a purge. Depending on the email and how much searching, and if I get pulled somewhere else, this could be a 5 to 10 minute process or longer depending. And let's just go ahead and automate that piece. Any malicious email, let's just purge it. And we can send the email off, we can reply to the user and purge. So now we saved ourselves a little more time. So next is, okay, well, how can I even get rid of me having to think about emails? Then you come into the analytics part, which might be the heaviest piece of the flow. But if you integrate the right APIs and you do a little tweaking here and there, you can actually then do purges, reply backs, and everything without even having to think about it. So instead of doing all that at once, we do little parts, and we're able to save time to just continuously reinvest. And that's that's what I saw in my daily work life, was being able to save time to make more time for investing into the flows. So halfway mark, any questions on anything I just said? Okay, so
Adam, I think the one thing I like about this kind of conversation too is, for everybody on the call, there's no perfect recipe. I think getting started is probably one of the hardest things to do. And then figuring out there is the ability to improve 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. But as you build upon that, there's additional time savings that everybody in our industry needs, quite candidly.
Yep, exactly. And that's something that we, like I said, we kind of found out through building these flows. Oh, go back one. Still on the last slide. So
sorry.
The next piece we kind of look at when we're doing these flows is, let's just look at the structure of an event. For kickoff of a phishing flow, it's an email. So different headers, there's different attachments, different URLs, maybe some URLs even forward on to other domains. So we kind of think about all these for our analytics, and then we can build out accordingly. So now we have the full piece, and then we go to the implementation of the flow, which usually like, okay, well, I just start it and let it go. But the nice thing about a SOAR application is, and especially in this case, if you're just taking out the security and thinking of orchestration, automation, and response, we can help other teams. So let's say you don't deal with phishing in your company. Well, there's another team that does. And ultimately, if something bad happens, it will affect you guys, where the email will, be clicked, malware will be downloaded, and then it's in your hands. So by helping somebody else, you can save yourself from the inevitable late night trying to figure out what's going on. So implementing these flows, you kind of get a conversation going with anyone affected, and it allows you to, build out that complete awareness around the company. And then the last piece is the return investments and time savings. So what we can do is actually, depending on where the email ends, a different time amount's added. So searching and purging an email will take longer than just replying to a good email. So we can make these little ROI tweaks and get those metrics that really help us see insight into how much time are we saving by using a security orchestration, automation, response tool, versus if I just every day went through and, worked through it, right? I could actually get that information on how much I saved per email. So second half of the slide, if there's any other questions, feel free, let me know. Otherwise, Lucas, we're good to go on. Okay, so current use cases, and this is probably the part a lot of you might be more interested in, and what we're doing today. So I have some substantial flows we're using, and these are considered substantial just because either they save a lot of time or they run a lot. And then I have some planned use cases just to kind of explain what we actually could do. Now, for phishing remediation, we talked about it. We'll forget about that one for now. The next big one is our privileged access management flow. And this is another idea from Dan. And it was generally let's monitor all of our admin accounts. Domain admin, server admin, anyone who has privileged access, let's make sure that they stay where they're supposed to stay and they don't jump around. So we monitor for a malicious actor getting in domain admin, but we also monitor for that IT user that wants to make a really quick tweak by going in domain admin. The issue is that what if they don't remove themselves from the group, and then we have a potential, security issue. So what we can do is with our SIM, we can monitor for anyone adding themselves to groups without following process, and we can say, they didn't follow exactly the company's standards for adding themselves domain admin. And for us, we have to get manager approval. We look to make sure if a particular group added that user and it wasn't themselves, and was it done in a reasonable time from the time a ticket was created. So with security flow, we were able to identify those steps and then just do a true false. Is there a ticket assigned for this user to do this? If yes, we're good. Did a manager approve it? If yes, we're good. Now, if it fails somewhere, we remove them from that group. They have just gone. They're not in there anymore. It's done. And this flow on initial development, we were running in our dev Active Directory, and in dev, people add themselves domain admin all the time just for testing or whatever reason they're doing. And there was a user that was sitting close to me, and he was actively adding himself to domain admin. And little did he know that the flow was running and I was testing it, and he was getting continuously removed from domain admin as he was trying to do his work. So luckily enough for him, he was sitting right next to me, and I was able to hear him over a couple like choice words at his computer about why it wasn't working, and come to find out that the PAM flow is actually just removing him with no impunity because there was no ticket created to say he could do that. So it kind of gives us that peace of mind where if you think about it, on Christmas Day at 1 a.m, who's going to be monitoring, who's going to be watching, and who's going to ultimately react? Well, for us, we can say, well, if it happens, security flow is going to be there to kick them off. And then we'll get emails, alerts, tickets, everything will be created before I even wake up and see what's going on. So that ability to quickly respond is really kind of where we get some benefits out of this flow. The next one I have, and I know that's kind of a big one, so I'll take another pause if anyone has a question about how we do that process or anything.
Well, I want to chime in here. I think part of what happens when you're building out or maybe even going in or thinking about doing orchestration and automation, it's not just a technology. There's a people process. So there's other people that are going to be impacted by this, but I know for a fact that nobody is questioning that use case now because the risk associated with it is very high. So now you once they understand that you have to follow a process, nobody's going to fight with it or argue with it. And I love the concept, by the way. It's good.
Yes, thanks. So other flows, the Typosquatting prevention, which I'll talk about at the very end, just to give kind of a taste of what we're doing and what it looks like. The network change security updates. So this is another process related flow where we had network engineers going and adding new subnets to our environment. And the process was they create a ticket, security is notified, and then we can add that subnet to our vulnerability scanner. But as everything, maybe someone's making a test, didn't remove it, or they forgot to create a ticket, or they just ignored it and it was fine, whatever. Well, now we know every time a subnet's created, and we add it to our vulnerability scanner before I even finish, reading my email about a new network was created. So this idea of being able to be really quick and monitor for these things is really nice, and it just kind of puts everything at ease where I don't really have to worry about, oh, did I finish adding that? Let me look in the ticket. Okay, I didn't. Let me now add it to our vulnerability scanner. It's done, and I can kind of forget about it. Leaked credentials. This is another flow where it was developed with the idea of saving some time for not necessarily us, but for another team. And this one is if we notice any external groups where they have leaked some users' credentials, whether it's from data breach or just an accidental problem on their end, we can actively remediate all of those users at once. Now, the current process is we send an email to every user affected. We ask them to change their passwords privately and in work. And we kind of just do a subtle remediation. We create a ticket, we do all the documentation, and for 5 users, it's not too bad of a process. But a couple months ago, what kicked off this flow to go to our backlog was we had 150 users where this happened to, and we had 3 users that were 3 people on our team that had their hands tied doing this for a whole day. So just running that flow saved us some time when we can run 150 users via CSV upload, inject that through the flow, and then all of a sudden we have the documentation, the CSVs updated, the ticket is completed, and it's all uploaded, and I don't have to worry about it. And I don't even have to go close the ticket because I have another flow that checks if a ticket is in a state ready to be closed, and it'll close it for me. So it's all done and I don't even have to really think about it. I just have to upload the CSV of users. So you can see where these are not necessarily running every day, but when it does run, it's a big time saver for me. Next, some plan use cases. So this first one, we have complete security metrics to Power BI, and it's still in its infancy stages. It's getting there, but at the end of every month, we run metrics. We get metrics for how many URLs we block, how many phishing emails we deleted, everything for upper management to kind of see what we're doing. Now, again, you would think at the end of the month you add a little incident here, you add some alerts here, and metrics aren't necessarily done perfectly every time, or they're a week late and you kind of get a message saying, hey, where are your metrics? Well, this flow's sole purpose is to one, never make me have to do metrics again, but also allow the ability to do hourly metrics or daily metrics, or like we do monthly metrics, where now we can do a more in-depth look even than what we're currently getting, and we just save everyone the time to do it. This type of connection is a part where, again, it's not necessarily security related. It's just saving us a bunch of time at the end of the month where I don't have to go in and type in a bunch of metrics. So if you're also, at home and you see it's the end of the month and you're, oh great, now I have to type in metrics, is kind of a savior, and it's amazing, and I can't wait for it to be done because I don't want to do metrics anymore. But another good flow, compromised credentials. This is similar to the leaked credentials piece, but it's more for if an active malicious actor is in our environment posing as somebody else, we can see that event or maybe just inject it ourselves, block, disable, and we can even query our SIM for all the events surrounding that user, print out a CSV and send it to us instead of having to go there and look ourselves. So it adds a little bit of analytics if you want something quick, or if you need to know something super serious, like, oh, was this user added to a particular group? Let me query the SIM, and we can do that all automatically. And it's kind of like magic when you have this issue, you go look and, oh, I have all the data I need, and then you can go to level 2 steps, and you don't have to worry about the initial data gathering. A piece of SOAR that this use case might be a little more complicated to initially build off, but at the time in the moment where you are actively trying to get someone out of your environment and you can do it quickly and efficiently, that's where SOAR really shines. It really helps. And when everyone's under pressure, there's always someone who's going to be kind of like, okay, do I remember what to do exactly? And that's where it helps. And last one, this one is, again, it's very infancy stages, but I actually got it. It was my most recent request from an engineer, and we have all our websites hosted, and all their IPs we scan for any vulnerabilities. So whenever we see a new website get created, we got to make sure it's in the process, it gets added to scanning, and we scan it properly. Well, there are times where they're not there, or someone creates some random website for a test. So we're able to pull all the IPs from our WAF and send them directly to our vulnerability scanner. And pretty much what we do is once a week, we pull the IPs, scan everything, and delete them. The next week, we do the same thing. And it was like a 30-second flow to create. The only issue is there's no API for this integration. So I pull out a Python node, I grab something from the internet, and I try my best and ultimately fail because I'm really bad at coding. And I just asked Michelle to do the rest for me. And so the great thing is working with a SOAR company in general, and Michelle's great at doing this, is where you have those issues where you can't necessarily do it all yourself, you can rely on the assistance of someone who is an expert to kind of get you that little bit, so you don't have to wait for an iteration or development process. So I know I've kind of said a lot. There's still no questions or anything? Okay, Lucas, you're good to go on. So the next piece I have for you guys is our playbooks. So this is kind of our metrics that I was kind of mentioning. We're running about 20 playbooks today. They range from the big ones I mentioned previously to the small 5-minute flows. And we get about 1,500 flows a month. And I looked today and we're roughly at 1,700 flows for this month so far. And in total, we've saved about 12 and a half working days for 1 month, which is almost 25 days so far this year, which it's only March. So, and this isn't including our March metrics. So just looking at this time, you're seeing, okay, well, that's a lot of time saved, but it's also a complete perfect process being made, as in the process we defined, we can be certain that it's completed every time. We have the ticket, we have the documentation, everything we've set forth is done every time without issues. So with that, the security flow gives you the ability to run things 24/7, but also it gives you that process that you don't have to worry about, oh wait, did I click the right checkbox, or did I fill in all the documentation correctly? It's all there to what you define. It's really beneficial for us, not only from saving the time, but being able to reinvest into more and develop more at the end of the day. Any questions with that?
You mentioned, I have a quick comment and question. You mentioned documentation. Can you talk a little bit about the documentation you add into the playbooks?
Yes. So whenever we do run our flows, there's always little things that happen that we want to know about and we document in our tickets. So we integrate pretty heavily with ServiceNow for every alert we do or every event. And Security Flow is able to write via API to those tickets. So when I tell it to complete something, I also tell it to then make a comment in the ticket to tell me what it did. So when I look back, I can see, okay, so this many users were affected, or this occurred at this time, and I can go back and actually see what's happening. Okay, Lucas, I think I'm on to the last slide. So as I mentioned, this is my last piece, and I kind of wanted to just show you guys a little bit about what we're doing. I know Michelle will have a little bit of a demo later. So for us, the Typosquatting flow was one of those flows that kicked off because we had an event. We had malicious actor create a fake domain and use it to try to get to our HR members and have information sent over to them. So we currently have a program that tells us, are any Typosquatting domains created to affect any of our homegrown domains? And here we have an instance where somebody created a fake domain and they did it 2 days before this flow ran. And you can kind of see it's a little blurry in the top right. March 15th is when the flow ran. The creation of this domain was March 13th, and it was registered by a domain or registrar we don't use. So the flow is able to save me time by getting the data, whereas here it can tell me the who is, and also we have an API that does a scan of that domain and return a nice little image there, and really tell me, okay, this is everything that occurred. Now I can make the decision to block it. So each time this happens, I would be going into our proxy, 2 Exchange servers, and changing in 2 different locations for each Exchange server. Working together, I'm able to do this really quickly with one decision to remediate instead of spending 10 minutes logging in, making the changes, making the ticket, documenting the ticket, and then saying everything's done. And where this flow isn't necessarily required to run every day, when it does run, I have that peace of mind where I can say, it's good. I know that it's there. I can check the ticket. And if I'm not worried about it, or if I want to do more, I can always just do more because it's given me the basic data that I would have collected in the first place. So from there, that's really all I have and wanted to talk about. But if you guys do have any questions, don't be afraid to put them in the chat and I'll respond back that way. But that's kind of how we got into SOAR and where we're kind of going. And it is a continual process. We'll never probably reach completion because there's a new use case every day, but we're able to constantly save ourselves the time and the pain of going through everything all the time, and we can just reinvest it into ourselves. And that's kind of where SOAR really shines.
And I think you mentioned having conversations with Chris, right? Every time you have a conversation with him, you end up coming up with another idea.
Yes, that was the WAF idea last, but I have one engineer is every time we get on a call, he says something that makes me want to build a new flow. And it's kind of common. It's turned into my daily life where I've even installed some consumer-free versions of flows, and I've done things in my personal network to save myself time. So it's kind of becoming a part of what I do, and I kind of see security flows all over the place. So I just kind of lucky that way.
That's good. Good job, Adam. Thank you. So Michelle, I think, are you next?
I am, yeah. Oops, I lost the window there. So what I want to talk about before we get into any kind of demos is I want to go over what we consider the biggest differentiators for security flow. And I'll go through some of the whys on these on the next slide, but I'll just go over these here first. So beyond the powerful feature set that we have, there's an ability to expand upon the features. And then this feature, this broadcast event mechanism, we think is actually a pretty cool feature. It lets you essentially decouple aspects of your flows from the behavior of the flows. And one of the demos will go through this and I'll show how that works. Additionally, and this is to help get anybody started, right? We always have professional service hours included with our license. And those professional service hours are to get going, right? We're talking about helping with, helping with coming up with the goals for a particular flow, figure out what the requirements are, maybe working on actually doing the implementation as well. And then big one is our flexible licensing model. We have no limit on actions and no limit on the number of users that can access the system. We want you to take advantage of it. So if you could switch to the next slide, please. All right, so what is the flexibility? I'll give an example that Land O'Lakes had. So they wanted to get metrics about their SIM, and internally there's no particular node that we supply with our integration that provides a way to get this data, but their SIM vendor was able to provide them with a script that they had already written that they said, well, you can run this script and use it and be able to get that data on them whenever you want to execute that script. And so that script was then taken, integrated into a flow, and now it runs as basically a cron job once a month, grabs all the data and then emails it out. The broadcast event mechanism, as I briefly went over, is to reduce or eliminate flow changes. So what we're talking about here is we can add a node into the flow that just says, hey, anything that knows how to gather threat intel on an IOC, please gather it. And it all comes in and it becomes part of the flow. Or anything that knows how to black hole or block a domain, please perform that action. And then, with our professional services, we want to make sure that you're up and running and get you going with that. And so that's why we provide it with all of our licenses. And then because we have unlimited seats, unlimited actions, there's a known cross structure and without limitations for you. With that said, I'd like to just go and talk about what's first, really. I don't want to go into this in too much detail because Adam already went over it in terms of how they work with their system. So essentially the steps are, you plan, you see where there's some low-hanging fruit or where you can save some time. And that's where you start first. The next part is really figuring out what the goals or the requirements are for that. Prototyping is the next step, and then flow building and testing. And those 4 steps, the goals to testing, are really where we think our professional services come into play, because we can help you get started and get going so that there's less of a ramp up time. and you're immediately getting benefits and seeing some kind of ROI. And then the next few steps are really how you transition, right? You want to gather time savings and ROI metrics because management's going to want to see that. And then once you're all set and ready to go, that's when you do the production deployment. And then the maintenance is that continual process of making sure that you're keeping things up to date. At this point, I'm going to open it up to questions if anybody has any. Otherwise, I'd like to start with the demos, and I want to hand off to Steve so that he can talk about some of the background as to why we're doing these demos.
Cool, thanks. So a couple quick things. Again, Steve Gorsh here with CrowdStrike. We are actively working with Nevolex Labs to make sure that there's constant enhancement over the capabilities that we've got with that. For those that aren't familiar with CrowdStrike, CrowdStrike is an endpoint protection technology. We're an EDR technology, a single sensor that we deploy out to all the various endpoints, and we gather system telemetry there. So a lot of us are probably familiar with kind of that space. There are a couple of things that make CrowdStrike unique. It's all cloud-based, so there's a single point of interaction with all of these endpoints, and that data is live streamed and available real time for us inside the CrowdStrike console. On top of that, the CrowdStrike sensor itself has the ability to go and reach out to all of the devices and not only gather telemetry, but perform actions. So if I needed to run some scripts, or if I needed to go and change some registry keys or delete some files or stop services or whatever, the CrowdStrike sensor gives me the ability to go and do that individually for any device that it's installed on. Where that comes into play with this conversation is that now that we have that ability to go and interact and impact those endpoints, especially from a security perspective, we can now automate that type of behavior as well. And that's the type of stuff that Michelle is going to show here shortly. One of the capabilities that CrowdStrike offers is just a simple network containment. So we don't have to have any sort of firewall capability. The sensor itself can simply just go and isolate a device from the network. But in the CrowdStrike console today, there's only the ability to really do that one at a time. I have to pick a single device, click network contain, and do it. With Nevolex Security Flow, we can actually do that in bulk and do that in mass. On top of that, within the CrowdStrike console, again, I mentioned the ability to go and run scripts on the endpoints or delete files or stop services, etc. The technical piece in CrowdStrike, that's called real-time response. But again, in the CrowdStrike console, we can only actively do those kind of steps on a single device at a time. Whereas there might be a reason that I want to be able to do that again in bulk. And that's what we can enable via the API. And then also the plugin there with Security Flow. So Michelle, I'll kick it back to you to show off kind of how this is built, but wanted to at least set the stage for a couple of the basic actions that we're going to show right now.
All right, sounds great. Thank you. I'll start sharing. And then I need to log into my system. This is the main login screen of Security Flow. And I'll end up on the dashboard here. What I want to show is an existing flow that I built out for this purpose. And this flow lets us take in information from one of two ways. One is through a CSV, so we could take a list that way. And the other one is I've just got a test installation here. First two nodes are essentially just assigning a category and assigning a name to this incident. This is when we go through and perform the operation to find all hosts that are in a normal state within the CrowdStrike environment. A normal host is one that has network access. It hasn't been contained. So we're looking for those that are uncontained within a specific network. And one thing I forgot to mention here is we're actually taking the IP and converting it to a CIDR block. And so we're going to block everything within that range of 255 hosts, essentially. And then once we've found the hosts that are normal, we're going to contain them. And we can perform a host action to contain. There's actually a number of operations that you can perform, but in this case, we're just going to contain it. And then once we've completed those steps, we actually close this. Now, instead of doing this sort of injection manually here from a flow, a lot of users can be, or users can be made within the system to not have access to this screen. So another way that we can do it instead is we can go back to the dashboard. And what I'll do is I'll create an injection widget, essentially. And I'll find a CSV injection widget. I'll say this is for containment. And click next. And now I'll have a dropdown which will say, hey, which location do you want to inject into? And I'll say contain hosts, add this and save it. Now I've got a widget that allows me to do containment. I'm going to open up the flows one more time just to keep that as a separate tab. And once this finishes loading, we have a debug console here, and some of the nodes in the flow are simply there for debugging. You don't need to keep them active in production, but when you're building, it's useful to have them. So these particular nodes here are just here to let you see what happened. So that's why I wanted to keep this thing up and running. So now I can go pick everything on the 17 network. The IP address doesn't matter as much, but if I wanted to inject for multiple networks, I could actually have multiple lists because I've configured this to support a CSV list. So each line represents another row. Now, if I inject this, it'll say, hey, are you sure you want to inject this? I'll inject, go back over here, and it's already finished running. But if we look at the message here, this final debug message shows us there have been 3 affected hosts. And I should have shown this host management beforehand. But if I look at this list right now, this is the list of 10 hosts that are being managed by CrowdStrike. So now if I reload this page, there should be 3 hosts now that are either getting contained or are contained. So these are the 3 that have been contained. And one of the other things I can do is within our dashboard, I can go look at our set of incidents. And this is the incident that just ran, which was the contain for this. And so this is the timeline that I was talking about briefly in the terminology section. And we have a data renderer here set up that says, okay, so at this time, about 3:54, we did a CrowdStrike host action, and the host action was contained. These were the affected hosts. We could have gathered more data, like the actual host name or IP, things like that, and had that get built out into this data renderer. But for the purposes of this demo, we just limited it to this. And then there's a corresponding flow that was just built out that does the opposite, which is lift containment. And when I built this one, I actually didn't have to build it from scratch exactly this way. I was able to just select the nodes of interest, copy them, and then paste and hook up this connection to perform the operation. What was done that was different is the search changed to look for contained hosts instead of normal ones. And this operation was changed from lift containment, or from contain to lift containment. So it's the reverse operation essentially. And if I go through and if I were to go through and create a widget to do this injection, I could do the reverse operation. I'll just inject from a debugging perspective. I'll do it here. And so it's loading hosts, performing the host action of lifting the contain. And we should end up with 3 hosts that have had their containment lifted. And it should be the corresponding 3 hosts. And if we go look at the next incident in our timeline, here is the renderer that says, hey, we've lifted containment on these 3. Are there any questions about this? Otherwise, I will hand back to Steve so that he can talk about the next flow.
So to me, a couple things that I think are interesting while Lucas gets the slide deck back up. Like I said, I think just that ability to copy paste. I know Michelle will show a little bit all about being able to import from the library as well. But again, the big goal is to make all of that very, very easy. The next thing I wanted to bring up is and Adam had mentioned a little bit of this as well, but consistency in our process and the corresponding not only peace of mind, but just ensuring you're minimizing the risk whenever you're doing your existing process. The CrowdStrike Overwatch Start Report gets published a couple times a year, where we're kind of bundling up and summarizing all the different threat activities that we're seeing over the course of the year. And it's super interesting read. I definitely recommend checking it out. But one of the things that stood out to me in particular is that in basically every single attack breach scenario that was documented there, credential theft or credential privilege or privilege escalation, et cetera. In some cases, creds were misused, stolen, elevated, et cetera. So at some point, that credential usage and stuff like that is consistent across the board, which makes sense. Threat actors need to get some elevated privileges to be able to continue to move around the environment. But when you then also look into where some of those problems came up, you see things like admin accounts that didn't get deprovisioned properly, maybe disabled accounts that somehow automatically got enabled secretly in the back end side. Accounts that nobody forgot about that had an old password that was maybe exempt from a password complexity or password change requirement, taken advantage of there. And so, when you think about kind of even just a general HR type of perspective where I'm onboarding somebody or, heaven forbid, offboarding somebody, being able to have consistency in that process is a huge risk mitigation effort there. And that's what this demo will show is how do we, for example, have consistency when we're onboarding somebody? And I think about even CrowdStrike. So Lucas and I started at CrowdStrike a little over a year ago. I had to get provisioned for Salesforce. I got provisioned, obviously, in Active Directory. I got provisioned in Workday. I got provisioned with the ADP for all the benefits and payroll stuff. So there's a number of systems. I had Box, I had Google Drive. I had the Falcon provisioning stuff. So there's a number of things that all ultimately actually have API connectivity and availability, but we want to be able to be consistent when we're spinning somebody up or down. So that's this next demo here to kind of show how that can look.
Thanks, Steve. That was a good introduction, better than I would ever do. All right, so what I want to show now is a simplified onboarding flow. And this one is designed to onboard from Azure AD. If I go look in our library here, I've actually imported this strictly from our library. And as you navigate the library, you'll see there's a whole bunch of documentation. And this documentation tells you what this flow does, as well as the steps that you need to do to deploy this flow. So I'm not going to import it because I've already got it here and I've configured it. But the step for importing is essentially just selecting it, and then you end up with a new flow tab that has this defined flow. I then went through and followed these update instructions to get this into a working state. Now, there are 3 points of entry into this current flow. One is the inject node, which is for testing, right? So as you're developing, this is really useful. Another connection point is this link in. So if we were to, for example, have Workday or Salesforce or all of those things that you need to get provisioned on, you can connect multiple flows together just by having the output from one flow go into this one. Or you could have a central flow where it just connects to all of them at one point and they're running in parallel. And then the third entry point is we've set it up with a webhook. And so this webhook allows us to actually run an external script. And that external script is going to make a post into this flow and execute the operation to create this user. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do this sample install. And this one has been intentionally set up to fail. This one does not have a complex enough password, so it's going to fail on that step. And what I've done is part of this process is there's some metadata about the user's external email address, which is my sample test email address that I'm going to use here. So when I inject this, it tries to go create the user, and it should fail and send out an email to me. And I just got it. If I go look at this particular email now, I'm pretending here to be someone who is in IT managing this. So the flow has kicked off, and instead of creating the user with this password, we ended up with, hey, your password is not complex enough, and we're not going to let you create this user right now. So the user does not exist, and this flow failed. And if we look at the incident timelines, here's the onboarding one. It's still in the open state because it failed, and it'll give us the same type of information. It says, all right, this request failed, and it's the same reason, password complexity. Now what I want to demonstrate actually is the injection through a webhook. Now, before I do that, I need to authorize access to my machine to perform a webhook. And so I'll just come in here. I just want to make sure that that's been set up. And so look at here, my IP address has been added as an IP that's allowed to perform this operation. And I'll set up a temporary password to perform this. Click save. And now I've got the ability to perform webhooks. Go back into this one. Now I'll just show what the script is. Essentially, it's just a curl command. So if you're familiar with that, we're just posting data into this machine. And the data we're posting is nearly identical to what the sample message is in this inject, except it has a valid password in it. So now if I run that script, I have to enter a password to connect. It'll execute the operation, return the data. And what it has done is sent me, who is the new user, an onboarding email. And so here's my welcome aboard email that comes from Security Flow. And it's basically just, hey, welcome to our team. Here's your login credentials. And this is a one-time login credential. So the first time I try to log in, it's going to ask me to change this stuff. So I'm going to copy this link address just to show, oops. There we go. So I'll copy that, navigate in here, and I'll go in to log in and view this onboarding one. So this is the new user. And I don't know the password, so I will figure that one out right away. And once I input that password the first time, the steps have been set up to require me to do a password change. And that's me. This is this password change field now. And now it's logging me in, and it should redirect me into the spot where the employee handbook is. And so this kind of automation then is reproducible and tracked, right? So we know that it's happened, and we know that it's happened correctly. Additionally, within the timeline, if I look at my next incident that represents the adding of this user, this is the one that was completed. It's then closed by flow, indicating that it worked successfully and assigned licenses and created the user with all the initial details. Any questions on this one? All right. I'm going to stop sharing and I'll hand back to you, Steve.
Cool. Yeah, no, like I said, the thing I like about it again is it's just that consistency there. And like I said, with with the number of tiles that I had with onboarding with CrowdStrike, I can be sympathetic that mistakes can be potentially made. And this really helps alleviate that. Lucas, next slide. The last kind of major demo that we wanted to show off is just talking a little bit more about that phishing investigation. And honestly, Adam did a good job talking about just what they went through at Land O'Lakes going through that. But I kind of wanted to break it down. The biggest thing to me personally is that some of this stuff isn't like hard to do per se, right? It's not hard to go and look at some logs to go find out if somebody went to a URL. It's not hard to go to a website and paste in a domain and see what other services, know how to do that. None of that is hard, but it does take time. And again, that's the key underlying theme here. And as an example, when you're investigating a phishing event, just think about all the little tiny steps that you have to do. User reports, it takes a couple of minutes. And again, an analyst looks at it. Are there some domains in there? Again, not a lot of time, but takes a few minutes to go take a look. Have they actually been accessed? Okay, well, it takes a little bit longer. I got to probably check my web filter, or my web proxy. I might have to check my firewall. I might have to check another endpoint solution to see if somebody's actually went to those. Then I have to maybe even look at, has anybody else gone to any of those domains or anything similar? So also this investigation gets to be a little bit more. Still need to figure out, hey, is this domain bad or not? And then on top of that, now what do we do based on the information there? So again, for a single phishing event, 15, 20 minutes, you're probably done. But then it really goes to like, how often does that occur? Is that a once a month thing? Probably not. Talking with Adam and the Land O'Lakes team ahead of time, they might get 60 or 70 phishing emails that they need to investigate all at once. And again, the other thing here too is that, taking a quick look at this data, a human can make an assessment pretty quickly. You know what? These domains look bad. They're not that, not that old. They look like they have sketchy content on them. That's good enough for me. Let's go ahead and block that. And so again, being able to make those decisions quickly is really where an orchestration tool shines. So Michelle will have a chance to show that off actually right here.
All right, thanks, Steve. Great introduction again. So what I've done in this one is I've also imported a few, oops, let me move this Zoom bar out of the way, sorry. I've imported a few flows from our library, and it's this input email one, which is really straightforward. Its idea is I'm going to grab an email, I'm going to parse out any EML attachments, and then it's going to process the attachments. The idea of processing attachments is really just saving them off so that we have a reference to them, and then we can, for example, send them into CrowdStrike to do sandboxing on it and see what it comes up with. And then additionally, we're just gathering the body of the email and sending it on to the next step. And the next step is our IOC find and scan step. And the idea behind this one is it's just going to find all IOCs that it can in the buffer. So it's going to look for URLs, it's going to look for IPs, it's going to look for domains, and then file hashes as well if there happen to be any of those. The process here is really just to get us to the point of gathering threat intel. And this goes back to something I mentioned early on as a differentiator, which is our broadcast capability. So this node here, this gather threat intel node, is actually broadcasting and saying, hey, any service that knows how to give me threat intel, please do it. And then it'll run through this report analysis node. And this report analysis node is basically configured with some metadata that says, if I see these kind of statistics, I'm going to trust or distrust, or if it's somewhere in the middle of those two, I'm going to say, I don't know what to do. And this is where an interesting point comes into play, where we have the ability to allow the analyst to decide where to go next. Okay, so this is one of our waiter nodes, and a waiter node can be configured to say, all right, I'm going to give you an option to go down X number of paths where you can define those paths. You can look at the data and decide what you're going to do. If we decide at some point that this is malicious, we'll come in here and be able to perform a security and compliance search and then get a confirmation that they actually want to purge it and do the purge. The last step is to reply back to the end user. And this reply is essentially saying, okay, we either purge this message or we think it's safe and it's okay for you, excuse me, it's okay for you to use it again. So this skeleton here is really a great starting point for phishing. Obviously can be changed. It can either be used as the base for it, or it can just be used as a reference and build a new one from scratch. So I want to now actually go through and show you how this system, how this flow works by running through a sample here. I'm going to delete this one. So I have a folder that I'm monitoring with that flow. I'm going to mark my phishing email as unread so it can be pulled in, because this one is configured to just pull unread emails. And then I can trigger it. And it's fetching the email now. And what I want to do is actually watch what happens in the incident itself as this flow is running. So here's the phishing flow that's currently running. If I go in it, as updates happen, this timeline can be refreshed and it'll notify us as that's happening. So here's a notification that things are happening. So IOCs are found here and listed. These are all the IOCs that are being looked at. We've got this one listed as trusted already. If I go now and click this, we're in a state where it's waiting for input from me. And there's a URL and a domain that have been found, and we don't have enough information to make a decision right now. So what I want to do is go back and show you how I can change the behavior of the system by changing a plugin instance so that the broadcast event mechanism comes into play with another threat intel service. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come into this plugin, and I'm going to change its support for broadcasting to be on. It was initially turned off, so when the broadcast message came out, it didn't respond and didn't do anything. Now that it's enabled, if I run through that flow again, the behavior is going to change. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to ignore these waiters. I'm going to leave them as unknown just to skip it. Mark this one as unknown. And now we can go back and I'll trigger this flow manually. It will run on its own, but I want to trigger it manually just to see just to show what happens. So I'll mark this email as unread again. I'll trigger the flow. And now it's hitting and processing that same message again. So here's the new one. It's found the same IOCs as you'd expect. It's the same email, so no difference there. One thing I didn't show is you can actually see what the original email looks like in this email tab, except that all of the URLs are not clickable. They just show up as what the email would look like. And now we're in a spot where we have a little more detail. So the flow wasn't changed. We just enabled broadcasting. So previously, CrowdStrike was only showing, now it's recorded future and CrowdStrike. And for both of these, it looks like we don't want to trust it just based on this. So I'm going to mark this one as malicious, and this will take us into the next step of dealing with this email. All right, so now we're going to continue on. And if I look at our flows, we've made it through the find and scan, and we're now into the search and purge portion of it. And so what should be happening is we'll end up in here, and it's going to create a search within the security and compliance portal, and then it's going to run that search. And once that search has been completed, we'll have the ability to confirm whether or not we want to perform the search. So I'm just going to let this run. And what you can see now is, because I marked this as untrusted, that particular domain is no longer trusted. We're executing the search and it's running right now. This can sometimes take a little bit of time, but it's not something that you have to do manually. And now we're at the stage where it found all the affected mailboxes and it gives me a list of them. This one up here is just for informational sake. This is the response from the plugin, just to show you. And then this is when we're at the waiter node, waiting for a user to make a decision. You don't have to do that. You can have it just run automatically. But because we supply this node, you're able to, for example, have user intervention at steps throughout the way to confirm that you want to perform these steps. And you can see the contextual information of what's happened and why you ended up in this spot as well. And so I'm going to purge this, and I'll just say purge, and click purge, and now it's gone through the next step and it's going to execute a purge. So if I look at this email box, as it's running, at some point, this is going to be removed from my email, and it's going to perform a soft purge. So it's now gone. If I look at the deleted items, sometimes this takes a little while to get there. There's the one that was just deleted. This is the one from Tuesday. This is the email that just got soft deleted. And then the other thing that's going to happen is, now that we're done here, it's going to end up and send an email to me and give me a summary of, like, me as an end reporter of this phishing email. It now comes in, I'll look at my inbox, and it'll say, hey, the email you submitted appears to be potentially malicious, and it got rid of it for us. So that's the whole process that we go through, of providing a set of flows that can be imported quickly and get you in a state that may not be 100% what you're looking for, but it gets you pretty close and pretty quickly. The steps that I didn't show to set up this flow were about 5 minutes for me, but I'm very familiar with this flow and how to use it. And I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of a half hour in, you could figure out, at least with our input, how to get a flow like this up and running and usable. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then, are there any questions about this before we continue on to the next slide? All right.
I'm surprised there are not more people asking questions around email, because I know that's a pain.
Michelle, I do have one question for you. So, say I think I'm interested in building something out, but I'm not quite sure where to start. Can we engage you to even just talk through some of that at a high level? I know we've got the professional service hours and stuff like that, but I mean, if we're just in the concept phase of trying to talk that out, is that stuff that Nevelux Labs can help out with as well?
Yes, and absolutely. And this is where I think where the initial ramp up phase can be sped up by talking to us, right? Because we've had the experience with the system. We've seen what other people have been doing, like Land O'Lakes, for example. And that kind of collaboration can definitely help. Cool. So what are potential next steps? And we obviously would love to have a one-on-one conversation if anybody's interested, and have a discussion about the current state of your system and potentially where you think we might be able to help out. We can always do customized demos. So the demos we gave today, we had come up with a priori, but if you're looking for some kind of other information, we can help out with that. And then, as always, proof of concepts are welcome. We have a couple deployment models that we currently support. So there's a SaaS deployment with an AWS, and then we also have an OVA that can be deployed and tested with that way. So any questions on that? Otherwise,
yeah, time checked it. We had an hour and a half blocked off for this. So it's a lot of presenting, talking, showing UI, use cases. I would love, if anybody, has some questions, please ask away. We'll hang out as people jump off. If some people want to stay on and ask some questions, but feel free to reach out to me, Steve, Michelle, and even Adam if, after the fact, if you guys have questions. But right now, anybody have any specific questions, use cases? No? Dan Ose, you're raising your hand. What's up?
I am. Hey, so I just wanted to kind of offer this up as well. If anybody actually wants to go over or looking to share use cases, playbooks, runbooks, whatever you want to call them in your environment, we're always open to that. To Adam's point, he mentioned it earlier, we do have a fairly large backlog. We've got a lot that we've already completed, but we got a fairly large backlog and ideas as well on things that we're working on. Always willing to walk through that or talk through that with people. I think it's always good to kind of share and collaborate in the security space on what we can do and maybe how we do it different.
Thank you, Dan. I think that means a lot. There are lots of people that are on this kind of journey of improving their security posture, mitigating risk, and the concept of orchestration and automation is one that I think resonates with a lot of people. But actually getting started and going, I think, is probably one of the hardest things to do. And why I'm a fan of Nevix Labs is, I mean, Steve and I were working with Michelle when this kind of began, and I want to make sure I see the value and I see it being something that can help organizations in the not so distant future. But there's always the excuse that we don't have time. So Dan, for you to offer up that's pretty huge. So for anybody on the call, if you want to reach out after the fact and say, we'll take Dan up on that, or even want to get on a call with Michelle to talk through some general use cases, also welcome that. But the constant theme is you guys just don't have a lot of people, a lot of time, a lot of resources, and this is leveraging your existing security tech stack and even your tech stack to do more with what you already have today. And I think everybody kind of understands that, but it's good stuff. Adam, great job. Michelle, great job. Steve, great job. Really good information. I'm going to stop recording and let me